Hi guys, today I'm going to be making some mushroom infested zombies. This will work with pretty much any models you have, but I'm using some Frostgrove cultists. So, assemble your models. And first step, very important, get yourself a pint of tea. Mount your models on the bases, if they have an annoying integrated tab. And then I'm just using some Vallejo ground paste to add some texture to the bases. Then adding some very small rocks to add a bit of extra texture to it. Using a metal sculpting tool to push them down into the basing paste. Then we're going to grab some milliput. This stuff was a little bit out of date, but it still seems to be fine. And you take even parts A and B and mix them together. And you want to make sure that's entirely homogeneous. You don't want any hard bits forming inside it. Then, taking a small blob, we're going to press it into the first armless man. And this is going to be the first cluster of mushrooms that we're going to have growing out of his side. Then grabbing a sculpting tool, although a knife would probably work with this as well, we're just going to push into several shelves of mushrooms. So working from top to bottom, just make several ridges and make sure they're going all the way across and well defined. Now with milliput it's very useful to keep your sculpting tool wet, so I've got a small cup of water that I'm using to occasionally dip into, but ideally you don't want too much water to mix with the milliput, otherwise it can permeate through and then slip off of the model. And here just pressing some gills into the bottom side of the ridges to add a bit more texture. Next we're going to be making some kind of button mushrooms that will be coming out of his back, so we're just going to roll very small balls of milliput. And when you're working with this small amount of milliput, it can be a bit fiddly to get it off your fingers. So again, just dampening the blade so it gets a bit more purchase on it. And then stacking the small orbs next to each other to make a sort of bundle of mushrooms. Then slightly pushing on the back of them to give them a slightly squashed appearance. Then we go for a slightly larger one on his shoulder. So it's kind of nice to have the mushrooms kind of creeping over their shoulders and kind of growing out their back, so it gives them a slightly hunchbacked appearance, as if they're kind of being pushed down under the weight of these growths on them. Then here we're going to go for a mushroom with a divot in the middle, sort of like an open capped one. So we're just going to dampen the blade again and slowly push in the middle at different angles so we have a slightly rough but consistent dip going down the middle of it. So it's a very forgiving process, this. I mean, mushrooms being quite bulbous and misshapen, it doesn't have to be uniform, and you get some very nice results by just blobbing milliput on wherever you feel like it. Now I use this on a fantasy model, but this could easily be used in sci-fi settings, something like Stargrave or an RPG game or something. Just adds a bit more flavour to your regular zombies. Then again, just adding several small balls onto the back. And a bit of indecision about where to put it. If you look up some reference pictures of mushrooms and fungus, you can get some really crazy and wacky types that you could quite easily sculpt up and add to your models. So with the other ones, doing much the same, but adding a bit of texture to the mushrooms this time. So we're going to dig the tip of the blade in and wiggle it a little bit to make a sort of soft crack in the top of the mushroom. And going for a more top-heavy clusters for this guy. And working up over his head with the small button mushrooms. Then for the final guy, we're going to put a large cluster of mushrooms on his shield. That's why I went for the wooden one, so it would look quite fitting. And we're going to poke several kind of tracks across the mushroom on his other shoulder. And then put several of the small orbs on the tip of his axe. Now I want these guys to be kind of overgrown and rusty, as if they'd just been left in a damp cavern for years and years, and now they're finally coming back to life. They've been inhabited by these mushrooms. Maybe the mushrooms are what controlling them. Maybe it's a druid or a necromancer. Just very thematic. Then adding some mushrooms onto its stomach. There we have the three of them all mushroomed up. So we're going to get some Vallejo surface primer, get the painting glove on, and prime all over. Now you want to make sure that you completely hit all the milliput at this stage, because it will shine through with it being white. Also taking the chance to hit the base with the primer as well just helps to stick the gravel and the ground paste to the base. And as always, make sure you do the edges of the base as well. There we have a nicely primed up zombie. So, getting our wet palette out, we're going to grab some dark brown and give them a fairly heavy dry brush all over. We want to pick out the details, but we want to leave black in some of the recesses. I'm using mostly AK Interactive paints here. This one quite literally called dark brown. And also hitting the base as well. I'm just going to go for a very simple base and colour scheme on this one. Then grabbing some mahogany, we're going to hit the mushrooms. Give them that kind of chestnut mushroom appearance to them. If you wanted to, you could go yellow with this, but I'm keeping to a brown palette. Sort of autumnal colour scheme. I'm going to grab some P3 boiler black and colour the metallic section of the sword. But we are going to rust this down later, so it doesn't need to be full coverage. Then with a tan brown, we're going to come in and hit some of the details. So this is a very basic colour scheme, keeping to maybe 4 or 5 colours, all within the same hues. And with AK Interactive you get really heavily pigmented colours, so you get really nice sort of blending between them. And using the same tan to hit the arms and the exposed bones. This is going to highlight the ridges of the arms. And we're only going to hit the top part of the arm on the right side, where the light source would be directly above it, but not so much beneath it. and the exposed portions of the skull and face as well. And a small section of the underskirt and the trousers, as well as the top facing parts of the boots, just to again reinforce where the light source is coming from. And then of course hitting the base with a light dry brush of the tan. That's just a really simple colour scheme to help the bases stick out. But by using the same colour palette as you're using to paint the Mini, you tie the entire thing together. Then again hitting the tan on top of the mushrooms, just to blend it in slightly. Then we're going to grab a bleached bone colour and hit the ridges of the face and the back where the skull is poking out from beneath the mushrooms, and the top of the right arm where the bone is being revealed. Then we're going to grab mahogany again and hit the sword. So at this stage I don't think there's enough rust on the sword, so I'll go back in a second and hit that again. So grabbing quite a reddish brown, just going to dab it all across the blade. Don't want to do an entire clean cover, but just going to get splotches on it. And then going again with a orange-yellow colour. I believe it's called Burning Sun. And a bit more tan on the left arm. And it's good. So there we have the 3 zombie cultists ready to do whatever it is they do. Really good for D&D, just adding a bit of variation to some zombies, or cultists, or bandits even. You can really just experiment with the different types of mushrooms and the shapes. Just stick whatever shape of milliput you have on it and then poke it around with the sculpting tool a bit, and then you'll probably have something that looks a bit like a mushroom. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll catch you later.